Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's also a great pleasure to be joined by Representative Linda Joy Sullivan, who, as many of you know, recently ran a campaign for the Democratic nomination to the state auditor position. That campaign turned out to be unsuccessful, but she's also going to be on the ballot and returning for re-election as the state representative to the Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, and Mount Tabor district. So we had a chance to talk to her earlier and get her observations and reactions and feelings about the state auditor race that concluded earlier in August, as well as a chance to look forward at the special legislative session that will be getting underway on August 25th that will nail down the remaining 3/4 of the coming fiscal year's state budget. And we also talked about a few other things as well. It was great to have Representative Sullivan back on our show, and here's what we talked about. Representative Sullivan, great to have you back with us again today. Just wanted to kind of start off anyway by getting your thoughts and reflections on the state auditor race just concluded a few weeks ago. It didn't work out quite as planned, I guess, from your standpoint, but what did you take away from that race, and what, if any, might be future plans along those lines?
So first, thank you for having me. It's always wonderful to be here with you. So on the auditor race itself, pretty much my campaign was, let's put a true auditor back into the auditor's office. Let's get somebody who's actually a credentialed auditor, and let's get somebody who is not going to use audit opinions with any type of ideological lens. And we have here in Vermont a pick a party primary. Pretty much, it's like you can just cross the lines and say whatever party you want to be on during the primary. So, you can kind of raid another party. So I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat for a lifelong, for my life. And I, of course, ran in the Democratic Party ballot. It ran on that ballot. The incumbent, who's, a progressive, also ran on the Democratic ballot. And the incumbent also did a writing campaign to get on the progressive ballot and a writing campaign to get on the Republican ballot. So we had, and I was pretty much asked by some well-known Republicans if they did a writing campaign for me, if I would accept it. And I believe that the auditor, there should be no party when you're looking at the auditor race, okay? You're gonna come with a party, of course, but when you're doing audits and you're trained, you're going to be objective, you're going to be independent, you understand those skills. So I embraced, that. I said, sure, as long as it's clear that I'm a Democrat and, when we're going to be transparent. And it was. There was, in my opinion, not as much of a transparent Republican write-in race by the incumbent because it didn't come out until the very end. And I personally can't see that 1,000 Republican people coming out to say, okay, we're going to vote for the progressive to take the Republican ballot. So we kind of have it because we have this rating of ballots, pick a primary, and you could just do whatever you want. So it was an entirely different race. And then we had, as opposed to just saying, okay, this is my party, this is your party, this is somebody else's party. Let's just go to the general election and see what happens. Because of the pandemic as well, we also had a very difficult time in breaking into Montpelier, the Burlington area, that whole Chittenden County area. We did very strongly, down in the southern area. And I was, and I say that because I had the most amazing grassroots team. We did a whole grassroots campaign. The people who came out for me were amazing. My team was amazing. And we did everything we possibly could virtually. And when we were able on election day to go out and hold signs, they did, and I can't thank them enough. So I still believe that the auditor race is something that people should really look at. I think that it's important, specifically with all of the funds that are coming in from the pandemic and how they're being spent, that an auditor needs to understand, what is going on and how to do real audits, and understands GAAP and GAGAS and GAS and all those wonderful things that you discuss on the beach. So I think that it doesn't require somebody who's just going to be in there and pick and choose audits because they want to get a conclusion out there, and there's no oversight, there's no licensing. So I think it's very important that people pay closer attention to the auditor race in the future.
So that still leaves you, though, with, of course, running for re-election as a state representative from the Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, and Mount Tabor district, which you've represented since, 2016 now?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And so I guess just real quick, what are some of the main issues that are front and center in your mind from the state representative perspective going into the fall and then the following year? Obviously the pandemic and its related effects are probably front and center, and closely related to that would be, I suppose, economic issues as well. But what are some of the main things you are concerned about, particularly since the legislature will be returning to work next week on August 25th to do some work on the state budget, which we can talk about in a moment?
So I am, actually, humbled and honored that my district did vote for me again. And I did get both the D and the R one more time, which I've had before. So I have that as going into the general election. So I thank them for that. I think that before we go into the budget and the bigger issues up in Montpelier, I think we need to realize that my district, just like everyone else's district, we're not an island. And so the pandemic actually has an influence greater than people realize when it comes to my 5 towns and the bordering towns and everyone's district, particularly when it comes to, say, the elderly and how they are isolated. There's this scare, the fear. How are they going to get their meds? How are they going to get outside? How are we going to know that they are okay? So I have concerns about that. And I have concerns about difficulties like for not only everyone else, but for the elderly composting right now. How are they going to be able to deal with potential bear situations, rats and so on, like that? How are they going to afford to get some vehicle or entity to pick up the compost and take it to the appropriate dumpsters? These are all very difficult situations that the timing of legislature that came through was not stayed or delayed, that I think the pandemic should have called a stronger focus to look at, and say, hey, what's really going on? My district also, I'm highly concerned because of the economic development as everybody else is. You know, we've got restaurants, we've got mandates and restrictions, and we've got public health issues. So are the mandates that are required to keep everybody safe, you know, you're going to have arguments on both sides. Is it better to have those costs for regulation absorbed and keep everybody healthy? Of course. But how do you do it? How do you justify it? How do we stay in business? So I think our governor has done an amazing job of actually focusing on keeping people alive. And I think that is the biggest focus of all. And so we have to deal in my district with schools closing, childcare issues if they reopen, tourism. Our district is very concerned about tourism and keeping the culture that we have, and how do we regulate that? You know, there's so many difficulties when it comes to Airbnbs. You know, how do they deal with costs? How do they deal with opening or closing? We have the quarry issue. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the parking issues around the quarry? How do you deal with weddings? How do you deal with funerals? How do you deal with missing your family? How do you deal with the elderly in our district whose children are in a different state? They need to, you know, they want to see them, they want to touch them, they want them to come and stay in Vermont. And then if they do come and stay in Vermont, should we let them leave again? How do you get them back and forth to colleges? Like, what are the choices? Some of the people I know had received scholarships to out-of-state colleges and now changing and forfeiting those scholarships because they're going to go local instead. So there are a lot of issues and difficulties that each district has to focus on, apart from what's going on nationally. But nationally it flows down to our state, and then in our state it flows down to our districts. You know, everything is political and everything is bureaucratical, but at the end of the day, you want to keep the people alive, and you want to get money in their pockets. I'm really concerned that a lot of people don't have money to eat. I'm concerned that a lot of people don't have money to go to the doctor. I'm concerned that a lot of people who don't have money, we don't know if they have money or not. So I've been reaching out and working with people across not only in my 5 towns, but anyone who calls me, and trying to assist them. So, you know, then you worry about broadband. You know, right now, everybody needs to be broadband heavy so that we can communicate. But then you have some people who don't even know how to use the internet. Some people who could barely pick up a cell phone and use a cell phone. So those people have they disappeared? You know, so I've been calling people in my district and, you know, by regular telephone regularly, and checking in on them and making sure that they are okay, or they have at least a network around them if they need something. And I think that's the key, is the community. You know, the community is so important in my district, and I think in everyone else's district as well. And so if we can tap into one another and, you know, reach out to our clerk and reach out to our town manager and the select board, and we can say, hey, so-and-so is in need, here's what I'm able to do, how do we help? I think that's the most important thing, and the most difficult part, I believe, of my job right now, is stepping actually into my car and saying, I can't come and touch you because I have to keep my distance, but what do you need and how can I get it for you? And if you don't have a phone, how can I help you? If you need a check and you haven't received your check, how can I make sure I can reach out to the administration and get you your check? And the administration has been absolutely wonderful. When I contact them and I say, gee, I have a constituent who hasn't received a check, within minutes they are on it. So, and I appreciate that, and I do believe that's because I do work so well across the party lines. And I think that's very important. You know, if you can say you work across party lines, but then there's a difference of taking action and actually working across party lines. So my main concern is protecting everybody, keeping them healthy, and then figuring out how we're going to rebuild the economy, right? And how we're going to sustain whatever we build, okay, and still keep the recreational and cultural opportunities that my district has.
Well, as mentioned earlier, next week on the 25th, the legislature will be returning to work, I'm assuming remotely, and you'll be tackling the remaining 3 quarters or 9 months of the proposed fiscal year 21 budget. The governor put forward, I believe it was earlier this week. I suppose probably a lot of folks surprised, looked like he was able to tap revenues left over from last year before the economy kind of went into, I'm not sure if free fall is the right word, but stopped growing, let's put it that way. And without increasing taxes, which of course, as we know, is an important point for him, and still would wind up balancing the budget. I guess, as from your perspective, what is your sense of what's going to happen when the legislature reconvenes and starts going through the governor's proposal? Is it going to be marked up and amended and altered, or is it going to sail through fairly quickly and we have a budget for the full FY21 in place, as opposed to just the first quarter of the year, which is where things left off earlier this spring?
So, you know, it keeps changing and shifting from what you hear from, you know, the leadership in the House, you know. But right now, I think that the primary concern is going to be the budget. My hope is that again, is not going to become politicized, that it's not going to be, okay, how can we go in and battle the budget because it's a general election coming up, and that we can actually say, how can we make the budget work and how can we make sure that appropriate funds are going to help the people within the state of Vermont. So I think that our primary responsibilities will be for each committee to actually focus on the budget to make sure that the CRF funding is actually being used appropriately, that we make recommendations if there are any new federal funds that are going to come down, and that we actually focus on the law and how we can use those funds appropriately if they do become available. I think most of the committees will probably have 1 or 2 bills that they have on their calendar, but I think the key right now is going to be the budget. I think there'll be a lot of disappointment for some legislators who were hoping that maybe other bills would come through before the budget, and that, you know, maybe the marijuana bill, or maybe, you know, the global warming bill, or, you know, bills such as that. And, you know, what about the marijuana bill? What about the seatbelt issue in there? And, you know, how will that work? And will we get to discuss it? And I'm thinking, hopefully, that we'll be more intelligent and we'll focus on the money right now, because in my opinion, that's what we need to focus on. We need to go in there and we need to say, can you actually use these funds appropriately? Can we work with the administration to make sure that the funds are used timely, that they are not going to create a disaster later on? And how do we get as much money legally and appropriately for the benefit of the people of Vermont and get it into their hands now without, taxing? The people can't afford to be taxed now. And, you can say, okay, tax the rich, give it to the poor, those are great ideas and that whole Robin Hood thing, but you can't do that now. Right now, you have to say everybody who is living a lifestyle, that lifestyle has changed because of this pandemic. Whether you have more money than one person, okay, does not mean that you are now in more trouble than somebody who didn't have as much money. Because the pandemic has changed everybody's financial situation. And it doesn't stop the use of funds prior from being taxed. So if you had to draw down on some monies to live, to survive, the IRS is still going to tax you on that. So you still have to come up with funds to cover. So there's going to be a shift in definition of who is really richer, who is middle class, who wasn't middle class, who's getting more benefits because they met certain criteria. And I think that we need to see this blend and not say A, B, or C is better off or worse. We need to worry about everybody. And we need to come in there and we need to look at these monies and say, how do we get these funds to Vermonters without breaking the rules?
So are you anticipating a fairly short session, this one that begins next week? Is this going to be just a couple of weeks maybe and really tightly focused around the budget and financial questions? Or, I'm assuming that's what most lawmakers would like, since then we're kind of into re-election season. And it's a little bit different campaigning this year than it's been in years past. Or might this turn into a session that runs right through September?
Right, so I think it's going to run through September. I think that it will be, I think first there is going to have to be a decision made if we want to continue to do everything remotely. So that will be step one. And if everybody votes no, then I guess that's over. But I'm sure that's going to continue. And then there will be setups like, where are we getting schedules for our committees on when to meet? So I'm thinking we're definitely going to go through September, because I think you have to juggle the committee assignments based on the Zoom and the broadband and who can meet when. So for example, if my committee is going to meet 2 times a week, maybe appropriations has to meet 5 times a week, or maybe they have to meet 2 times but longer times. So I think the whole scheduling that goes on first is going to be a key factor in how much time we're going to spend there. And I think what comes out of each committee, and then how it affects, say, the money committee, so how it would affect Ways and Means and Appropriations and the Capital Bill, all of the different committee meetings will be thrown back to those committees to see the budget and how it's affected, and where you can shift dollars from this account to this account and see how we can actually cover what's needed. So I do think it's going to go through September. I hope it's not going to go longer, but it's possible. But I think the end of September, we should have a good handle on the monies. I would hope that a lot of bills aren't just thrown in there to buy time. My preference would be focus on the budget. Let's get that taken care of. Let's be smart. Let's look at the unfunded pension liabilities. How are we going to deal with that issue? How are we going to deal with any potential monies that need to be spent by December that came in, from the CRF. So I would hope that we focus on that and we don't focus on bills, no matter how disappointing, that can be brought back in January.
How critical is it that the federal government, the Congress, comes up with a bill, sort of a successor to the CARES Act? As you know, right when a couple of weeks ago, anyway, before Congress recessed, they were deadlocked over a successor bill to the CARES Act, which had them arguing over a $3 trillion measure or a $1 trillion measure. But in the event that Congress is unable to come up with a compromise and basically nothing happens, then let's say the president's executive orders, how serious is that? I mean, is that really going to hamstring, let's say, the financial situation in Vermont, or is it a kind of a case where we'll figure it out and we'll get by somehow or another?
So I'm going to say it's going to be a case where we'll get by, we'll figure it out, and we'll hopefully work together and figure it out. Of course, everybody wants that windfall of money. I mean, everybody wants money and everybody needs money. But I think that right now, I don't think Vermont is in the panic mode that maybe other states are in. I think that, we have a higher reserve, we have good investments. I think that we have money that actually can be legally shifted around to cover certain, areas that we need to keep people sustainable and keep them eating and keep them, able to keep jobs and so on and move forward. I think the economic development is the key for us. So I'm not going to say panic over the fact that we're not going to get money maybe, but I think, of course, everybody wants it. Why wouldn't you want it? And that's like, do you want 2 presents for the holiday or 1, So everybody always wants more, and everybody definitely, Montpelier likes to spend. So they're going to want money, but I don't think that I think what's going to harm Vermont more is not focusing on how to get economic development here for the long term and how to get our school system in place and keep it in place and watch out that we don't have any type of resurgence because of not being smart about what we put in place. So my hopes are that we focus on the budget, we focus on getting the school system, and we get child care in place, and we focus on watching out for any type of further addiction issues that could come from being isolated and being left alone. And we make sure that everybody's covered so that there's human contact somehow across the state of Vermont with one another, and that everybody has money at least to eat and pay their bills. And then we need to develop money coming in. I know it sounds, just idealistic, but I really think we can do it. I think because Vermont is a powerful state in a small state, and that's the beauty of it. It's small enough for all of us to speak to one another and reach out and touch one another.